Good evening and welcome to the briancrombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Housing and the housing crisis has been a topic of numerous conversations on my show, but also around a lot of dinner tables. But I thought it would be interesting to address a bunch of the other sort of peripheral issues that go around this overall housing affordability issue. And so Leor Margulies, who is the head of real estate legal work at Robbins Appleby LLC, is with us tonight to sort of talk through some of these peripheral issues that I think end up having a really major impact on whether we're actually going to be able to address this affordability issue in housing. Leor, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a beautiful day out here on Sunday afternoon, Sunday morning, but yes, so thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
It's my pleasure to have you back again. So let's talk about some of the legal issues and political issues that surround what's going on from a housing standpoint. You and I have spoken before about the dramatic need for increased supply. We've talked about some of the policies that the provincial government has put in place in regards to trying to increase that supply with Bill 23, Bill 109, increasing density, increasing height, making the zoning easier to change, to achieve. But this Greenbelt fiasco really set them back. Tell me what you think happened with the Greenbelt, what really should have happened, and should that land in your mind be frozen or should it be opened up, and why?
Well, again, this is from the outside looking in, but I mean, in terms of the Greenbelt itself, it's obviously a very sensitive issue for all Ontarians. Maintaining green space or maintaining agricultural land is very important, and that's what the Liberals did several years ago. But then it conflicts with the question of how do we expand land supply and housing supply if we freeze 2 million acres of land just sort of holus bolus. And over the years, there has been exceptions made in the Greenbelt, because the Greenbelt was made, originally there was some science to it, but not a lot. And what's happened is there's probably a lot of land that is close to development, is adjacent to development, or part of it, where the boundaries cut through it. And for those parcels, it would make sense from a development perspective to take them out of the Greenbelt and add them. Of course, you don't want to really tamper with the major component of the Greenbelt, but there are certainly lands that would help add to the supply. And I think that's what the government was trying to do. That's been their whole focus. They've been, I don't want to say fixated in a good way, but they've been focused very strong on how do we increase the supply, because that's what's going to bring down housing to a more affordable level and offer a variety of housing. And right now the bulk of the housing at affordable is all high rise. And the thought of having a piece of property, whether it's a townhouse, a semi, is becoming a pipe dream, because it's gotten so expensive because land is unavailable. So the idea of opening the Greenbelt for specific lands to a limited supply, I think, is a good idea. What happened, and that was their goal. What did they do? They had, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 acres out of 2 million. So it wasn't a huge dent. The problem was the process. And to this day, I can't figure out why they went through that process. The process should have been, okay, we want to, we recognize that throughout the Greenbelt, there are potential pieces of land that would be ready for much closer to development than straight green land that's going to have to go through 10 years of zoning. And what they should have done is open it up and say, okay, if you have a piece of land that you think is ready, it's right next door to, let's say, existing development, and that it's unfairly caught in the Greenbelt area and will add development land quickly, then put in your application, give us the reasons, and have a process to do that. Have an independent committee to review those applications, and then make it fair. I think some of the lands that were put in, notwithstanding all the hoopla and the thought that, oh, there was a back room and it was all friends and stuff. A lot of that land was really land that's been sitting there for a long time that should have gone in, and it got mixed up with the potential ones that were somewhat questionable. If they had just gone through a fair process, maybe it would have taken 6 months. Developers, landowners could say, look, my little piece of land, my 100 acres here shouldn't be caught in this 2 million acres. Look where it is. look, you know, it's right next door to 1,000 homes, that type of thing, and look at the environmental impact, do all that in a really scientific way. Maybe they could have still got 7,000 acres, but done it fairly. They didn't do that. They did it, you know, sort of behind the scenes, having, unfortunately, you know, one, it seems that they had one staff, chief of staff for Ministry of Housing go through it, and it just it gave it the appearance of unfairness and cronyism, and that was unfortunate, because I'm sure 3/4 of those lands were probably the right lands, but it didn't go through an open and fair process, and that should always be there. I mean, the 2 million acres should not be frozen for lifetime. There should be opportunities. Things change as well, and but you know, for now, politically, no one will touch this with a 10-foot pole, unfortunately, because there were probably some good pieces of land. I know we were involved with one developer. We were acting for an affordable, a nonprofit housing corporation. I won't name them. That was going to get out of, I know there were going to be 5,000 homes. We were going to get 1,200 affordable homes, you know, based on the cost of land, and this was going to allow them to put homes out there for people really, you know, at the lower level of income. That's all gone. So that's sort of, you know, we threw out the baby with the bathwater. It's unfortunate, because that would have been, I think, a good one. Everyone was in support of it, but now all the lands that went to Greenbelt, come out of Greenbelt, are now back in Greenbelt. So you're starting from scratch, and I think everything that's not going to change for a while politically. There's no way that they can touch this again, not for a while.
So I think the issue is that, you know, you said it was the appearance of cronyism.
Right.
I think that a lot of people think that it just didn't appear to be cronyism. It really was cronyism.
Look, I'm not gonna, we all can read what we've seen. I think part of it was they wanted to do it quickly, to be fair. Everything has been done in a rush. And this could have taken, if my suggested process, or any similar process, would have taken 6 months to a year. But it would have at least allowed for the right pieces of land to go in, if there were, and a proper process that people could complain, could attend, and then a decision could have been made. So was it, you know, it is what it is. It was clearly mishandled. You know, we lost a housing minister who I believe was an excellent housing minister. It did a lot of good things, but this one was just a total unfortunate disaster, and it didn't need to be that way. If you wanted to open up, like I said, you could have done it, and it was unnecessary.
So let's talk about the principle of the idea that some portions of the Greenbelt should be considered to be taken out, which is your first point. You know, once land is declared to be in the Greenbelt, one would presume that the value of that land goes down fairly dramatically, because it's undevelopable land. And then if it's deemed to be developable by some provincial organization, authority, government, etc., the value is going to go up fairly dramatically. I think that's one of the issues, and I think people talked about an $8 billion or something like that number. I'm not sure how they calculated it, but an $8 billion increase in value. Who should that increase in value go to? I think is one issue. Who do you think it should go to?
Well, that's a fair point. You know, if you've owned land and you bought land at a value, you know, commensurate with agricultural, and now you've suddenly got a windfall. No, you're right. There should be a process that says, okay, if your land's coming in and it's obviously, you know, going to have a higher density, have higher value, then a portion of that has to come back. Has to come back in affordable housing. Primarily, that would be the way to do it. You say, okay, if you're getting, you know, 500, potentially 600 homes, some portion of that, and I don't know how you would work that out, but there would be a valuation saying, okay, 20% has to be affordable. You have to, you know, so like what we were doing with our client was doing with the nonprofit provider. You're going to get 25% of that land goes to you at, let's say, no cost, and maybe no cost and it's service, and then you build the homes. That would be shared, so that way you don't get the full value. A portion of that value has to come back, and the best way to make it come back is let's get the supply, but let's get a portion of that at an affordable level. That's the way I would see handling it. You come up with a formula. in terms of.
But that wasn't done, right? All of the value, 100% of the value would have gone to the lucky landowners that got the increase in density because it was deemed to be outside of the greenbelt.
Well, they were required to build within, I think, a certain period of time, and if it didn't get built, it would go back into the greenbelt. But yes, you're right. I keep going back to the one example that we have. I'm not at liberty to disclose, but this was a really reputable builder that recognized that they got value, and they made a substantial deal with the local authorities and this nonprofit group that they were going to get a substantial chunk of this land service, and either low cost, I don't know the terms, but obviously it was they were giving up a substantial amount and recognition of the fact that they had finally got their lands through the system. And it's unfortunate. Everybody would have benefited there. We've got more market value lands, housing, and we would have got some substantial over the next 5 or 10 years affordable housing for lower.
And that's great that your client did that. But I do think that was one of the mistakes, is that there wasn't a negotiated and or frankly regulated process such that some, if not the substantial amount of the increased value in the value of the land went from the developer to the government, because the government was effectively the entity that was creating that value by changing the zoning designation from greenbelt to developable land. I also think, as you pointed out, that there should have been, and I don't think there was everywhere, this stipulation that they had to be developed. The premier said that they had to be developed within a certain period of time, but that wasn't a contracted agreement. And several of the landowners said that they wouldn't be developed within a certain time period. They needed local municipalities to dramatically increase the infrastructure that was available to the area, and that would take a fair amount of time and effort and money to provide the infrastructure. So I think that you're right that the process was flawed. I think that cronyism was too obvious when packages were handed over at dinners of information, and there wasn't a process by where civil servants and or some sort of tribunal was able to evaluate. It was one staffer, and it appeared that staffer was only influenced by packages received from friends of his or the ministers or the premiers or who knows exactly how those individuals. But let's come back to the overriding principle. So you think that once area is deemed a greenbelt, it shouldn't be sacrosanct. We should be able to allow some of those lands to be deemed developable in the future.
Yeah, I think there should be a process for landowners to apply. I think look, they haven't thought it through, and now they've wound it back so that they can't take it out of the greenbelt except by legislation. Up till they're passing legislation that says you can't take it out unless they pass a bill that says this land comes out. Before, it was done by ministerial order, so they could do it like in a week. But I think what they should think about and come up with is a process, set out a process of maybe every 2 years, 3 years, you allow for applications. You may say the maximum we can do is X number of acres. Set out the criteria for removing it. Set out the criteria for sharing the value, as you suggested, Brian. And then there will be opportunities to do that without tampering with a major component of the 2 million acres. And there, like I said, it may take a while to set out that criteria. It'll be a lot of heartache. But I think it's important because you can't sterilize 2 million acres forever. It's silly. Things change, needs change, agricultural requirements and processes change. But you have to have a clear, transparent process. And I think if they do that, whether it's with this government or after the next election, I don't think anything's going to happen in the next 2 years on this. It's just too hot. It's just too hot. But I think that would be fair. We want to preserve greenbelt. We don't want to have a total sprawl. But on the other hand, there are portions of those lands that make sense. And as time goes on, we may need less. The province is going to keep growing, and it has to grow somewhere. A lot of other countries have. I know in London they've tampered with their greenbelt. They have a huge greenbelt around the Greater London area, and they've started to tamper with it. I haven't looked at how they do it, but you can't make it etched in stone. But you need a fair process, and they could come up with one. I'm a firm believer that they could, and then people could put in something and say, okay, we're going to move these lands in. They're not environmentally sensitive. We're going to give 25% to the Peel Nonprofit Housing Corporation. We're going to service the land. There could be process that would benefit everybody, I think.
We're chatting with Leor Margulies, the head of real estate legal practices at Robbins Appleby LLC. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Leor and talking about some of the real estate issues. We're going to turn to some of the challenges that condominium developers have had, some bankruptcy, some challenges, some problems from a financial standpoint in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about real estate issues, some issues other than just the zoning issues that we've been talking about a lot on this show with Leor Margulies from Robbins Appleby LLP, who is a really intelligent, smart, experienced gentleman in the real estate business. He runs the real estate practice for Robbins Appleby. We've just been chatting about the Greenbelt. We might come back to it a little bit further, but now we want to talk about some developers that are in the news. And there's three that I wanted to chat with you about, Leor. Addy Developments and a prosecution that was ongoing, Stateview Homes that had some regulatory issues, and the one that's in receivership. So let's start with Addy Developments. What was the prosecution? Was it necessary? What did it accomplish?
Well, Addy is a fairly well established high-rise developer. They've been doing developments, I think, for probably 10 or 12 years. And they had a development in Burlington called Notique that was caught in two things affected them. One, which we all know about, which is the zoning process. They went to market on this, I can't remember, it's probably about 300 units, so it's a mid-high rise. They went to market in 2015. They did not have their zoning in place, which now developers have learned you don't go to market till you have your zoning because you don't know how long it's going to take. And it took them 4 years of fighting with the city of Burlington at the OLT to get it through. So they finally got their zoning in 2019. And by then, costs had gone up. Obviously, carrying the land for 4 years had gone up, and they were forced to use their early termination condition, which says you need sales and financing in place. They had to terminate the agreements and resell them because the market had changed. And I think they probably even I'm not certain, may have redesigned the building. And I think a good portion of the original purchasers stayed on. Then they started, they had their financing, they got their construction. And I think this is now going back, it's now a year ago. So it would have been early 22. You may recall the whole construction industry was faced with the supply chain issue in terms of delays, cost overruns, and they were faced, in addition to just the cost overruns, they had a lot of their costs fixed. But back then, it was a cowboy town. I know other developers faced this as well. I don't know the specific trade, so I'm just going by generally what I understood, but a lot of their big trades came to them and said, well, I'm sorry, we have a $3 million forming contract. Costs have gone up, our employees salaries have gone up. It's now $5 million. We have a contract. Well, that's too bad. So go sue us. What are you going to do? You're going to sue somebody in the middle of a project? You have to continue. You can't stop. And they were faced with a number of those that created cost overruns that made the project just totally uneconomic in the midst of construction. It's very unusual. Usually this happens before construction starts, when you make a decision to proceed or not and cancel. This was very unusual because they'd already started construction, were already out of the ground, and they were faced with these, a number of trades that put them in this position. So they couldn't proceed. They would have had to put in so much extra money, it would have to cover the cost overruns. It didn't make sense. So they went back to their purchasers and tried to tell them, look, we can either. They were still in their financing condition, even though they had financing. The financing required another, I don't know, $6-8 million of cost overrun money to put in, which they didn't have. So they went to purchasers and said, look, we can't build at these prices. Again, this is the second time. So optically, it doesn't look too good. Now, the second time with a lot of these purchasers, can't build. We'll build. they offered them all kinds of incentives. They had to increase the prices for those to stay in, but less than market price. And for those that didn't want to stay in, they terminated using their termination condition. Now that was all valid. The regulatory authorities had no issue with that because they were entitled to do that. What the problem is, under your purchase and sale agreement, under the Tarion Addendum, which is a 10-page addendum that it's no longer Tarion, it's now administered by HCRA, the regulatory authority for licensing. You have to return deposits within 10 days if you cancel an agreement. And normally that's not a problem, because normally if you canceled an agreement, the project, it's usually at the beginning stage before you start construction, and all the deposits are in the lawyer's trust account, like my trust account. In this case, a lot of them had already been released into the project with insurance, so the purchasers were always protected, but it was impossible to pay them back in 10 days. They used a lot of their own money to pay them back. They resold, but it took them much longer, and they offered them 6% interest, which they didn't have to do. And back then the interest rate was like, 0. But they were offside there. It also came at a time, if you may recall, we may even had a talk, you and me, Brian, about all these builders that were facing these cost overrun increases, and we're going back to purchasers saying it's not viable. They might have had a legal right to do so with their early termination conditions. And the government was getting a lot of heat at that time about, what are you doing about all these builders who are squeezing their purchasers for extra money, to whether it's low rise or high rise? What are you doing? And who are they going to? It was HCRA. HCRA has the responsibility to deal with that type of issue, and nobody had ever been prosecuted for this, for improper behavior, because they deal with illegal and ethical behavior by builders. So that was the spring, and there was this issue. As I said, it's the second cancellation. So it does, without knowing anything, it doesn't look too good. They didn't return the deposits, which was unfortunate and also unusual. They finally issued basically an order to take away their licenses on 4 or 5 projects, and they alleged all kinds of things. Honestly, I read the materials. If you read this, if they were all true, I wouldn't let these builders proceed either. But none of, unfortunately, I know the builder cooperated fully with them. When it came down, when you went through all these allegations, the one allegation that was true was that they didn't pay back the deposits within the 10 days. There's no question, they just couldn't do it. They did pay them all back. It took them about 6 months with interest. And they ultimately settled an order that had a very small fine, $60,000, which is pretty low. And the order required them to pay this interest at 6%, which they were paying in any event. So it wasn't in addition, but it put them out of business for 6 or 8 months. And it made it very difficult for them. And it was, it was really unfortunate, because they were a good, a conscientious builder. They were faced with a terrible situation. And, the issue of the 10 days is a problem in those circumstances. It's an unusual problem. And, they're now back in business, finishing their projects, and they've never had a problem before. So it was a situation of, we have to do something. This looks like a really serious situation. HCRA, were they right or wrong to go after them? The issue was there, but all the other allegations, like I read them, I have no idea how they came up with them, and they dropped them all. So it was really unfortunate and also for the projects, because they lost their financing. Lenders wouldn't lend to them while they were under this cloud, right? Even though they were allowed to build 2 projects, those 2, so it was really, really tough for them. And the settlement was a fair settlement. We have to deal with this 10 days going forward in the addendum, because I think the purchasers were protected. They were never going to lose their money. It's only a question of when, because they had insurance, but the insurance is not there to pay it out. The deposit insurance is there for when a project goes under and there's a loss. Not in this type of situation. And these insurers are not really insurers; they're indemnitors. Normal insurance company, insurance, whatever, they're expecting to have claims, and they have to pay it out a little less than they make. That's how they do it. The deposit insurers, they don't pay out anything. I would venture to guess in the last 30 years, if there's been 1 or 2 payouts, it's a lot. So, Tarion had said, well, why don't you go back to the insurance company and have them pay it out? Well, it sounds fair, but the reality is that's not how they operate, and you'd never be doing business again if you asked your insurance company to pay it out. and then you'll pay them back. They're not, like I said, not business. It had a good settlement, it had a good affair, but it took 8 months, and it really put a hole in this company's business. They're back in business, and but it was a lesson to be learned. But out of that, you'll see there's a whole bunch of advisories about how builders are supposed to deal with purchasers on these issues, which has been positive. But these people unfortunately had to be the.
So what are the lessons learned? Do we need insurance that can pay out in 10 days?
No, look, no, you can't. The insurance. If you had insurance like that, the premiums would be huge, and that would just make it uneconomic or add more cost.
But you're buying off the contractor. The developer is signing an agreement that says, "I'll pay you out in 10 days." So they've got to have the ability to do so. It's a contractual obligation.
You're right. No, 9 times out of 10, that's not a problem, because the project is canceled, as I said, before construction starts, before deposits are released from the lawyer's trust account. So I'll have the money to pay it back. It's only in this sort of unusual circumstance where you're already up constructing, you have your trades in place, you have your financing supposedly, and suddenly you hit with an unexpected situation of your costs escalating dramatically.
But Leor, costs have gone up dramatically. They have gone up dramatically over the course of the last couple of years. So this is not the only developer that's been faced with this. How have the other developers dealt with this problem?
I honestly, I haven't heard of developers. Well, a lot of them, if they can absorb it, they absorb it. I had another one. Their elevator guy, he just jacked up the price $400,000, so they could sue him, or they could finish the building and sue him afterwards. So they absorbed it. But $6 or $8 million, that's a lot to absorb. The others have, if they were within their time frame, they could terminate. But again, it's unusual to see a project that's already well underway to have that kind, like a high-rise project, to have that kind of cost escalation. I think it's a very unusual circumstance, and the agreement doesn't contemplate it. And it's unfortunate, that they couldn't have come up with they try. I mean, I think those circumstances, you have to allow a little extra time to get the money back.
So is this buyer beware that, purchasers of pre-construction condos that think they're buying at a set price, they should be warned that, hey, you may not be, you may have developers come back and ask you for more money later on.
We do. Absolutely. And this has been that type of, well, the pre-construction contracts now have, for like 4 or 5 years, a 2-page sort of warning clause in red letters and stuff saying this is pre-construction. There may be early termination conditions. It's higher risk, so that people know that they're getting in early. They're getting in at presumably a lower price, but their potential is that the project could get canceled. They'll get their money back, but they may lose their opportunity cost. That's out there, and hopefully that won't change, because it allows projects to move quicker, and also gives investors an opportunity to get in earlier. It allows for a range of investment. You don't have to buy early. You can buy later on when it's already constructed or partly constructed, but you're probably going to pay a little more. But you have certainty. So everyone at least has a choice, as long as they know what the risks are, and people know what the risks are.
But the pitch that the consumer is receiving is, buy it now at the current pricing, and you'll get the uplift between now and whatever the pricing is when it's finally complete. And so therefore, that's part of the marketing. I think part of the problem is that the consumers know that their deposits are going to be used to actually fund some of the construction cost, albeit with insurance, but insurance that doesn't pay out, as you described, within that 10-day time period. But those deposits are actually being used.
Yeah, well, that's a function of financing for both low rise and high rise. And if you're going to get to the state view, then you'll get to the low rise issue.
Okay, tell me about State View. What's the issue there?
Well, State View was a small builder. I think they, based on what I was told, over from 6 or 8 years, they built 160 or 200 homes, low rise homes. So with no problem, between 2010 and 2018. Between 2018, 19, and 21, they sold 700 or 800 homes, which for them is a huge jump. And we're all talking low rise, singles, semis, townhouses. But what they did, they were buying land and selling substantially during the COVID era. And what was happening was they would buy land, market the land before they even closed, like market the land. They would get whatever draft plan approvals that they needed. You needed in some cases before they could sell. Take deposits in before they even closed the land purchase, and then use those deposits as part of their equity to fund the land purchase, which is fine as long as you then can proceed to build the houses and turn them over. And that was their sort of modus operandi, very unusual, but legal. And if they build, it's legitimate. They started a number of projects, and in the middle, this is like a sidebar, but it's what blew up the whole thing. Their banker was TD Bank, and for a year they had a check kiting scheme, purportedly, where you write checks and then you take money out and you cover them, and it's sort of like a shell game. And it went on apparently for a year. Again, this is another mystery to me, how a bank could allow that kind of thing to go unnoticed for a year. And their claim, the bank claimed that they had lost $37 million in this 1 year while they're doing these other deals. And they pulled the plug on them, and that froze all their accounts. It froze all the monies that were flowing into their accounts for the project. So the project stopped, and they tried to make a deal with TD Bank to pay them the money back. The other lenders who were financing the construction projects for low-rise said, we're not dealing with these guys, and their money's frozen. They put in receivers all over the place. And there's like 5 or 6 projects that went into, that are now either being finished by the receiver or are being sold unfinished by the receiver. And what will happen to those purchasers, I'm not certain. I think there's a real risk for those people that some of their deposits may not be insured, because low rise as opposed to high rise, there's no obligation to hold the monies in trust by the vendor, by their lawyers or an escrow agent, which you do have to do in condominium. The theory being it's a shorter time frame, and there really has never been any material problem over the last 30-40 years where purchasers have actually lost their deposits or Tarion has had to pay out on deposits because a developer took the money and didn't build and close. It's just not it hasn't been an issue. I believe, I stand to be corrected, that Stateview will change that equation quite dramatically, because you take up to 10% of the deposit. So on a $1.2 million home, you might take $120,000, and maybe a $90,000 or $100 is insured. And these deposits we'll see what comes back. And we don't know, because you have to see how the value of these lands will liquidate, and if there's going to be money left for them to pay out the deposits. Tyrion's on the hook for a maximum amount of, it's up to 100 based on the purchase price, and it escalates up to 100. But a lot of the purchase prices were in excess of a level that there's a portion that's uninsured completely. And it's probably unlikely that the purchasers will get back all their money. They'll get whatever they get from Tarion. The excess may be in question, and Tarion may be facing a loss. Again, we don't know, because they haven't liquidated all these lands. But it's an unfortunate situation, which didn't have to be. I don't know what these guys were doing, how they thought they would get away with stealing $37 million from TD Bank and not get caught.
So Leor, what's the lesson learned here? Clearly check kiting is a problem, and a consumer can't solve that. That's up to TD Bank. But it sounds like the deposits are part of the problem here again. That deposits aren't as refundable as people think they are.
Well, I mean, I expect the regulatory authorities will look at what the rules are going forward, and I expect that some type of set of new rules may come into play. that will require them either to be insured or at least kept with the lawyer in trust, at least to a certain stage. I mean, the real risk is, generally getting to construction. Once the builder has got his building permit, starts construction, 99 times 100, they're going to finish the house. The question is getting there, and there may be some type of I'm hoping if there is a change. Most builders do not want to change because, quite frankly, this is a form of financing. Purchaser deposits can be used for soft costs, marketing costs, servicing, whatever, at an early stage. And if you lock them up, then you have to get insurance.
But you got to be honest and say whether it's a refundable deposit or a non-refundable deposit. It sounds like some of these times, they're called a refundable deposit, but they're not really.
Well, the builder's obliged to give them back. Whether he has the financial capability to do it is a separate issue. But it may go towards an insurance model like we have for condos. I'm hoping that won't be the case because, quite frankly, that extra cost to the builder will just get passed on to the purchaser. And so, how much more extra cost do we want? There has to be a balance, and it's not up to me to determine what's fair. But I think there's some compromise between just going to a condo situation, which would be, the simplest, but the most expensive, to something in between to reduce the risk of this kind of thing happening. This is, again, very unusual. Again, you have to look at, are we going to take an elephant gun to shoot a fly? This is once, second time, actually. Urban Corp was like this, but the market took care of all of the Urban Corp projects so that all the purchasers got every dime back. They didn't get their economic losses, but they got all their monies back because the value of the lands were there. I don't know what will happen here. They were sold at the top of the market, and we know that the values have dropped. So, not being a genius, but extrapolating it, I'm expecting the value of these lands to go below what they were sold for. And that means there's going to be a loss somewhere, and the purchaser or Terrian, because remember, purchaser's covered for most of his deposit, but Terrian may suffer loss, and that's something they don't like either.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back, and we're going to talk about one of the biggest receiverships, the one at Bloor & Young, that's been on the front page of a lot of news, in just 2 minutes with Leor Margulies from Robbins Appleby LLP. Stay with us, everybody.
How are we doing so far?
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Leor Margulies. He is the head of real estate legal work at Robbins Appleby LLP. We've been chatting about the Greenbelt. We've been talking about some financial challenges with condominium builders as well as low-rise single-family home builders. But Leor, one of the ones that's been in the press the most is the one, which is at Bloor & Young, and it's gone into receivership. And this was, like full page ads in the newspapers and unbelievable marketing to sell it. What went wrong there?
Well, again, I don't have any inside information on what went wrong. There's a number of things that have happened that have made the project challenging. Number one, the design of the project. It's a very expensive project. I'm not a construction expert, but normally, the forming, the concrete forming of a building is such that, let's say your plumbing is all in one line. You can't move it around anywhere you like. They've done the forming such that it's a much more expensive process, but allows a lot more flexibility to design the units, which is great, but it makes the cost very expensive. So it's been a very expensive project. It's a very big project, which means it takes a long time. And time always works against the developer because shit happens. For instance, one of the things that happened, this was a building that was going to be 10 floors of retail and commercial. They were going to have a hotel, and then they were going to have expensive units on top. The commercial was supposed to pay in large part for the rest of the building. And the key for this commercial retail was the Apple store. Apple does not have a presence on Bloor Street. We represented Great Gulf on the 1 Bloor Street East, which is across the street, the 76-story building. And they had looked at this, but they didn't move in on that one. And so the Apple is not there. And so they had made a substantial lease to Apple. That would be the flagship of their retail, and that would help attract a lot more other retail. and they're in dispute. There's Apple said that they hadn't met their obligations, time frame or otherwise. They pulled out of their offer to lease. They're being sued, so I don't know who's right or wrong. But in the meantime, there's no flagship, and from my understanding, there really isn't any substantial retailers because they were relying on Apple. Apple to be the flagship. So that's number one. Number two, the partners, I believe, are Jenny Coco from Coco Paving and Sam Mizrahi from Mizrahi Developments, and they've been fighting for a number of years. There have been issues in the underlying financing. I know Jenny has been involved in this other receivership of bridge financing that was providing funds, and that's now a whole big mess. And I think when the two partners are fighting and can't don't get along, you're going to have problems. And then you have all these other problems of cost escalating. I think, based on the news reports, I think the original budget was at 1.6, or the last budget was 1.6. Now, based on the latest estimates, it's going to be $2 billion. So it's a $400 million overrun. And I think it's a consortium of Korean banks who have indicated they are prepared to fund another $300 million. But with the fighting between the owners, my understanding is that's what sort of broke the camel's back. They needed to have one captain leading the ship, and with they were fighting. I think one wanted to buy the other out. I think the receivership wasn't precipitated so much that it's taken so long and it's an overrun, because that's been ongoing for a while. It's really to deal with the fight between the owners, and the lenders wanted to be in control, in control of the site, and they've said that they've kept on Mizrahi as the development manager and construction manager, notwithstanding that they put in receiver Alvarez. So,
I was surprised at that. Tell me why you think they kept the existing developer that obviously had some challenges.
Well, my understanding is because of their issue wasn't solely with the overall management. It was the fact that the two owners could not get along and were stymieing the process by putting in the receiver and saying, okay, we're going to deal strictly with Sam. They felt more comfortable. They obviously have confidence in him based on keeping him on there to continue working on the project under obviously a very close supervision of Alvarez, so that money is well spent and so on. Clearly,
so it seems like a lot of the issues were caused by this dispute between the two partners, Mizrahi and Coco. Can you tell us anything about those two companies and or what the dispute is? Do you know?
I don't know what the dispute was. It probably relates to money. As I said, Jenny was linked to this other lender. I think it was called Bridge Financing, that has a whole checkered story about that. I'd have to it was lending money to related parties, and they were part of the backing for the financing here. It fell apart, and I think that probably added to the dispute between the owners, where Jenny was probably supposed to put in money. I'm purely speculating here, but it always boils down to money. And my sense is the money ran out. There were overruns. Where were they going to come from? And the lenders finally, got fed up of the infighting and said, we gotta take control. We got $1.5 billion here.
Yeah.
Based on what they said, they still have confidence in Sam to continue managing the project under probably very strict guidelines from Alvarez. Although they would have had a cost consultant anyways.
How are the buyers impacted?
Well, that's interesting, because there's I think I don't know, 70% sold. I think a lot of the buyers have been in there long. They would like to, reading the papers, and it makes sense that they want to get out, but lender doesn't want to let them out because they need buyers at the end of the day to close. Normally, when you take over a project and there's cost overruns, you want to get rid of the buyers because they got in too cheap, and you want to resell it at a higher price so that you can actually cover your costs or reduce your losses. This is sort of the reverse. If they got rid of all these buyers, the question is, will there be a whole stack of new buyers to replace them, and at what price? They're already in at $2,800 a foot. They're not going to get 35, or maybe they will. But so I don't think they want to get rid of those buyers, but the buyers, I'm sure they're not happy.
So, Leor, let's widen this to the issue today. I get an email probably every half a day about assignment sales of pre-construction condos and price reductions and things like this. What's going on? Obviously, interest rates have gone up. Pricing has, it would appear, gone down. People can't close on some of the contracts they've entered into. What's going to happen?
Well, I don't know. We will see what happens. I don't have a crystal ball, but right now, I mean, you have the biggest issue you have. The interest rates have caused huge issues on the developer side because their cost of financing has doubled or tripled. On the buying side, you're getting purchasers who bought properties with approvals based on a 2 or 3% 3 to 5 year mortgage, and now are being faced with a 6% or 7%. So will they still qualify? That's number one. That's number one problem as to their ability to close and get a mortgage that they can carry. The second problem is during COVID, as everyone knows, particularly low rise. High rise not as big an issue, and high rise sales during the COVID era, they're not going to close for another few years, most of those projects. So hopefully rates will come down and prices will stabilize. So I'm not as concerned about the condo market sort of imploding. But the low-rise market has been problematic because prices went up so dramatically from 2021 to 22, 30%, 40%, and now they're coming down. That's the reality. And so when you go for your mortgage and you bought $1 million house and you were expecting to get a, I don't know, 80% mortgage, let's say, so $800,000, the bank goes in there and they said, oh, you paid $1 million. That's nice. We're valuing it. Prices have gone down. We're valuing it at $850. So we're only going to give you a mortgage for, take it 80%, I don't know, $650,000 because we're only giving you 80% of market value, not the price. Suddenly purchasers are going to be short the difference. So they're facing two things. They can't carry it necessarily, potentially, and they're not getting enough money. So that's especially for those units sold later in the cycle of the COVID cycle. And I think we're seeing, purchasers having problems, and that's why you're seeing assignments. They're saying, okay, maybe I can find someone else who can afford to buy this house. Maybe I'll take a small loss, but not as much. The assignments will work generally where they're in the money, where they bought early in the cycle, so there's still equity there. So it's worthwhile to pay that price for the new purchaser, but he just can't carry it. So that's easier. But if the value of your property's gone down, then how are you going to get your money out? And you may end up assigning it and losing some of your deposit because the purchaser is going to pay less.
So if you are able to sell such that you get some money either equal to your deposit or some of your deposit, that's one thing. But what if you're not able to assign it? What happens if you just don't come to the party and close and pay your money?
Well, I mean, most builders, and we're seeing a lot of people are asking for extensions to get more time to get financing or find someone to buy it. But if at the end of the day you can't find somebody, builder, he's relied on your agreement, he's relied on your deposits. They'll terminate the agreement, take your deposit, and resell it.
Will they do that, or will they sue you for the difference?
Well, number one, if they would only sue you for the difference after applying the deposit. So if it was $1 million and you had $150,000 deposit, they only have to sell it for $850, leaving aside closing costs. If you sold for less than the $850, they might. To be honest, I think most builders won't. They'll take the deposit and they'll move on. To go after people that may not have anything, you spend a lot of money, you get bad press. But that's why, but the deposit, sadly, there's a lot of big deposits out there that are at risk for purchasers. And, vendor, unfortunately, they're not a charity institution, and they've relied on these deposits. They've spent the deposit, right? Because they're not in trust. They built the houses. Now they got to sell them. They can't guarantee the market going up, and they can't guarantee the market going
Leor,
down.
you and I probably both know lots of small-time investors that bought 4, 5, 6 pre-construction condos, And there were, seminars all over Toronto that people were, marketing and selling this idea, become rich by buying pre-construction condos and buy several of them. And they're all coming due in the next short while. Is this a problem?
Well, the ones that are coming due in the near term will be less of a problem if people can't get the financing to close, because if they're coming due now in the next year, then they bought them 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago when prices were much lower. So they're what I call in the money. So they should have a better ability to, at least if they can't close, find someone who will pick it up. Maybe they sell it for less than the sale price, but they still make something or get their money back. Builders don't like assignments. We don't want to have a whole bunch of assignments competing with unsold units. So you may have to close and then sell, or do it back to back. But I think those are less of a problem. The ones that, as I said, the ones that were sold in 2021, 22 at the peak of the market, those will only come due in a few years. And my hope, and I'm sure all my clients and the builders out there are hoping, that rates will come down as they expect it to come down to make them affordable, and the values will hold so that people won't be saying, okay, my condo's gone down 20%. So I don't see the same issue as with the low rise. The low rise is a much bigger problem for the late cycle units. There's no question. We'll see I think more defaults and more deposits forfeited. The high rise, yeah, those people that did 5.6, they shouldn't have done 5.6. They were all hoping to flip them, right? And maybe if the market comes back in 2-3 years, they will be able to flip them. That remains to be seen. Some of them may by the wayside if they can't find someone to come in with them. But if they're in the money, hopefully they can find someone that says, okay, we'll make some money, we'll share the profit. You'll leave half of it on the table, and I'll close. It depends how the market is when they come to do it. Right now it's a problem. There's a lot of assignments, and they've driven the price down.
There's a lot of assignments, and as I say, I probably get an email every half a day about assignment sales and best price and reduced price and big opportunity. So it worries me. We're going to take a break for some messages, a final break, and come back with Leor Margulies talking about what's going to happen in the future, and see what this smart gentleman, very experienced and knowledgeable in the real estate business, thinks is going to happen in Toronto. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 for some concluding comments. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We've been chatting tonight with Leor Margulies. He is the head of the real estate legal practice at Robbins Appleby LLP. He has been in the real estate business for a few decades. He knows the business extremely well. He has talked to us tonight about the Greenbelt, and he thinks that there should be an opportunity to take some properties out of the Greenbelt, but he thinks the problem is the process, or was the process. And he thinks if we had an appropriate process in the future, that given our growth, that we need to consider some of those lands, and that they're close to development with infrastructure close to them, will be developed in the future. That's something we should do. We've talked about both low rise and high rise challenges and bankruptcies and financial challenges. And we've been talking about assignment sales in the condominium sector, as well as in the low-rise sector. Leor, I want you to step back for a second, if I could, and I want you to think about sort of the future of Toronto. And there are something like 240 cranes in Toronto today. There are more cranes supposedly in Toronto than any other city, and frankly, most of the cities in North America put together. There are something like 240 construction cranes in operation, 100 high rises under construction, and 300 high rises proposed. So we've got a supply challenge in the past, and it's being solved potentially by a huge amount of condominium development, unprecedented in the history of Toronto, with, as I said, this huge amount of current construction ongoing that presumably has all been 70% sold in the pre-construction contracts that we've just spoken about, and 300 projects proposed. And a lot of those proposals your firm is probably taking to the OLT to get them expanded in size. And so a lot of developers that, had 30 and 40 stories approved are now going back to try to get 50 to 60 stories approved. And so the density is going to be substantial. If you couple that with the problem with assignment sales we've talked about, with the high interest rates that we've talked about, what do you think is going to happen? What's going to be the situation in 2025 and 2026?
Well, okay, it all stems to supply and demand. So the question is GTA, because I look at it's more than 416, it's GTA. Is GTA going to continue to be the magnet for growth in terms of population and business? If it continues, and you read all the numbers from immigration and into Canada and the large component that comes to GTA, you have to put people somewhere. The question is, where you put them. If that continues, I think in the next 2 years, the market will get back into gear. People will start buying and moving in. They have to live somewhere. You might see more, some of these 300 projects. You may have heard that, of course you've heard, the federal government finally did something. This is the first thing in my view, that they've actually done for housing supply, is to cut the HST from purpose-built rental. And I think the province is doing the same. So by taking off 13% of housing costs off those, I think you're going to see more purpose-built rental, and you might see some conversions of these condos into purpose-built rental. The real key is really Toronto. And I'll be honest, I live here, I love the city. I'm really worried about the city, the traffic, the congestion, the construction, the mismanagement, and the high cost. And at a certain point, people are going to say, why do I want to work here? Why do I want to live here? I'll go to Kitchener, I'll go to Barrie. I don't need to this. And if that starts happening and businesses start pulling out, that's a real problem. And that's my biggest worry. I think the market is there. The market will be there. Right now it's on sort of, I don't want to say pause, but it's definitely a slowdown. But there's so much demand. The question is, will we have the right supply? But I'm concerned in 5 years whether this city implodes. I mean, drive around the city. Yesterday, there wasn't a street. You couldn't get up from Lakeshore. You couldn't get up from Parliament. You couldn't get up from Jarvis. You couldn't get up from Sherbourne. What kind of city is this? Like, who's running this place? And people are going to get frustrated. Me, I live downtown. It's not the end of the world. So that's my biggest concern. I think demand will come back. I think all those assignments will. Right now, it's a problem, but interest rates are going to come down. And I think next year, Q3, Q4, you're going to see demand. People with the rates coming down, with the market stabilizing, you're going to see a lot more sales. But the long term, I do worry about this city. I honestly, driving yesterday, it really hit me home. I said, do people want to live in this place? People do not want to come downtown. Like, it's a problem, and no one is really talking about that. But it's I think they have to. Anyways, that's my prognostication.
So I think that there's been maybe too much development within a kilometer or so of Union Station, at least proposed, under construction and proposed, and I think that's led to a lot of the infrastructure, congestion, traffic, transit issues that you've identified. I think that the concern and the problem is that we haven't had similar development outside of the immediate downtown core, in major transit nodes, whether they be Yonge and Eglinton, Yonge and Shepherd, along the Bloor Danforth subway and along GO trains. And frankly, the balance of the 416 and particularly the 905 hasn't allowed their share of development. So we've concentrated the vast majority of increases in supply in high-rise condominiums right near Union Station. And I think we need to do some of that, but I think the balance of the city needed to contribute. And I think that that's going to lead to massive challenges that you've just quickly identified in the downtown Toronto area. And not everyone wants to live in a high-rise condominium right downtown. There's a lot of people that would like to live in an affordable home near their community. And that means that there's got to be some development in Mississauga and in Markham and in Durham, et cetera. And so I think the balance of the 905 and the outskirts of the 416 haven't contributed to the increase in supply. I got to tell you, I am worried not the long term, but I think I am worried in the medium term of those 200 projects currently under development that are going to be, finished in 2024, 25, 26. And I'm not sure where the interest rate's going to come down in 24. I don't think they're going to come down till late 25. And I think that there's going to be even more assignment sales and even more pressure on people that have made those commitments, as you say, sort of near the peak. And I think there's going to be a lot of bad negative stories, and I'm worried about that. And it's going to be the investors that have bought 3, 4, 5, 6 pre-construction condos, and I think that that's going to be the next story that comes out in the real estate business. Long term, I think that you're still going to have the need for supply, and so therefore the bankers were going to make sure that the developers do smart things, and some of the development that is overdeveloped won't get built because the bankers and the free market system and the developers and their market analyses and their feasibility studies don't allow them to be built if they shouldn't be built. So I don't think long term is going to be a problem, but I think the medium term is going to be a real issue. Anyway, thanks, Leor, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. All right. Take care.
That's our show for tonight. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from downtown Toronto at www.960am.com. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Good night.